She hated the cold Alpha King, until a storm forced them to survive together in the forest. The wind howled across the kingdom of Valdoria, carrying snow in sharp, cutting gusts that stung exposed skin. The grand halls of the castle were warm, gilded, and filled with the muted chatter of courtiers, yet outside, the world seemed alive with cold fury. Ilara, daughter of a minor noble, wrapped her cloak tightly around her shoulders. She hated the winter. She hated the Alpha King, who ruled it with a heart as hard as the ice covering the valleys, and she especially hated having to bow to him. Kalen, the Alpha King, was a figure whispered about in every household from the snowy north to the temperate south. His eyes were like glaciers, cold, brilliant, and terrifyingly still. His presence commanded obedience, yet beneath it, there was something that unsettled even the most loyal of his knights. Rumors said he could see the truths people tried to hide, and even the bravest felt naked under his gaze. Ilara had felt it firsthand. At court gatherings, when he spoke, his words were measured and sharp, cutting through lies and half-truths. When he looked at her, she felt exposed, as if he could see her anger, her fears, her hidden longing for freedom. She had hated him for years. She had sworn she would never bow to him in spirit, even if her body had to follow protocol. The day began like any other. Kalen had called for a hunt, a display of power, strength, and control over the wild lands beyond the castle walls. Nobles were expected to attend, showing respect while concealing their envy and fear. Ilara had protested quietly, but her father insisted it would be dangerous to refuse. And so, she found herself riding beside Kalen's retinue, shivering beneath layers of furs, her expression carefully neutral. The forest was silent at first, blanketed in fresh snow. Each hoofbeat echoed like a drum, loud in the stillness. Kalen rode ahead, a shadow of black fur and steel against the white landscape. His eyes scanned the trees, ever watchful, calculating. Ilara's gaze flicked to him, a mix of irritation and something she refused to name. "You ride cautiously," he said without turning. His voice was low, almost musical, but each word carried an edge. "I ride as I always do," she replied, keeping her tone even. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the intensity of standing near him. He looked at her then, a fleeting glance, and she felt her cheeks burn. She quickly turned her eyes forward. Minutes stretched, and the forest began to close around them. The snow thickened, the wind rising to a howl that rattled branches. Kalen signaled the hunters to slow, and they followed, forming a loose line through the drifts. Then it happened, the storm. It came without warning, a sudden fury of ice and wind that tore through the trees. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the horses balked, terrified by the roaring tempest. Branches cracked under the weight of snow, falling like jagged knives. Within moments, the party was scattered, separated by the fury of the blizzard. "Stay close," Kalen called, his voice barely audible over the roar. He spurred his horse forward, a living shadow cutting through the white chaos. Ilara gritted her teeth, urging her mount after him, but soon the wind threw her off balance. A falling branch struck the path ahead, and she was thrown from her horse, rolling into the snow. Pain flared in her side, sharp and biting. She groaned, struggling to rise, but the storm seemed determined to keep her down. Then a familiar shadow loomed over her. Kalen dismounted with surprising speed, his cloak whipping behind him. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "Stay close to me," he said. There was no softness in the words, yet the tone carried an unspoken command: "Trust me or perish." "I don't need your help," she snapped, though her voice was swallowed almost immediately by the wind. "You will take it," he said evenly, and without another word, he led her through the storm, his movements precise, unwavering. Somehow, even in the chaos, he seemed unshakable, as if the cold itself answered to him. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time lost all meaning in the blizzard. Their limbs ached, their faces were numb, and their breaths came in sharp, painful gasps. Ilara's anger simmered beneath the surface, battling the creeping realization that without him, she would not have survived this far. And Kalen, silent and commanding, moved with an almost preternatural sense of direction, navigating through the whiteness as if he had the forest etched into his mind. Finally, they stumbled upon shelter, a ruined shrine, half buried in snow, ancient stones etched with symbols long forgotten. The wind howled around it, but inside it was a hollowed sanctuary from the storm. Kalen forced the door open, gesturing for her to enter first. She hesitated, then stepped inside, the warmth of the small space, a meager thing but better than the storm, seeping into her bones. Kalen followed, closing the door behind him, brushing snow from his shoulders. He ignored her gaze, instead studying the walls, scanning the room for danger. Alara couldn't help but notice the slight tension in his shoulders, the subtle tightness of his jaw. Even he was not immune to the storm's power. They settled near the hearth, where remnants of a fire smoldered. Kalen knelt to blow life into the embers, his hands steady, precise. Alara watched him, a strange mix of resentment and reluctant admiration stirring within her. For the first time, she saw him not as a king, not as a tyrant, but as a man and a survivor. The storm raged outside, and in the quiet that followed, words became necessary. "You are different from what I expected," she said cautiously, her voice softer than intended. He glanced at her, one eyebrow lifted. "Different how?" "Not cruel," she admitted reluctantly. "Cold, yes, but not cruel." A flicker of something crossed his eyes, surprise, amusement, perhaps curiosity. He did not answer immediately, instead returning his attention to the fire. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Why did you come to the forest today?" she asked finally, her voice steadier now, tinged with curiosity. Kalen's gaze met hers, piercing through the dim light. "The forest is as much mine as the throne," he said. "And I do not relinquish what is mine, nor do I tolerate weakness." His words were sharp, but there was an undercurrent she could not ignore. Beneath the harshness was care, or something close to it. Alara's fingers curled around her cloak. She hated the realization that she might depend on him. She hated that her heart betrayed her when his presence brought warmth to the cold room. And yet, she could not deny it. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, relentless, and the forest seemed alive with whispers, as if the wind carried voices of the past, lost travelers, ancient spirits, and perhaps warnings. Kalen and Alara sat in tense quiet, listening, waiting, surviving. Then came the first sign of danger beyond the storm. A faint sound, barely audible over the wind, a movement, a scraping against the walls of the shrine. Kalen stiffened, instinct sharpening. "Stay close," he commanded, moving to block the entrance. His eyes scanned the shadows, and Alara followed his gaze, heart pounding. "Something out there," he said, voice low. "Something not entirely of this world." Alara swallowed, fear mingling with fascination. She had heard tales of forest spirits and creatures that preyed on travelers, but she never imagined facing one herself. And yet here she was, trapped with the very man she had hated, depending entirely on him for survival. The sound grew louder, deliberate, patient. Kalen's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his eyes never leaving the doorway. Alara could feel the tension radiating from him, a controlled energy that both terrified and enthralled her. She began, then hesitated. She wanted to protest, to run, to hide. But the storm outside had shown her the futility of resistance, and the fire in Kalen's gaze told her something undeniable. If she wanted to live, she had no choice but to trust him. The shadows shifted. A cold, dark shape moved past the broken windows of the shrine. The creature was massive, its presence oppressive, and yet it hesitated at the threshold. Kalen's voice cut through the air, calm, commanding, almost hypnotic. "Begone!" The creature snarled, a sound that seemed to shake the very walls. Alara gripped the edge of the table, her pulse racing. Then, as if answering to some unspoken power, it retreated, melting into the storm outside. Kalen exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders in small increments. His eyes, however, remained vigilant. He finally turned to her, a fleeting softness crossing his features, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "You are safe for now," he said. His voice was steady, certain, leaving no room for argument. "The storm may rage, but it will not claim us tonight." Alara nodded, though her heart still thudded in wild rhythms. She hated the dependency she felt, the gratitude that pricked her pride. And yet, buried beneath layers of resentment and fear, something else stirred, a fragile spark of trust, of fascination, perhaps even of longing. Outside, the storm continued its furious dance across the forest. Inside the shrine, two figures huddled near the fire, forced together by circumstance, each feeling the tremors of emotions they dared not name. The night stretched on, long and uncertain. And as the wind howled, Alara realized something terrifying and exhilarating at once. Survival was no longer enough. She was beginning to understand the man behind the legend, the Alpha King who could freeze hearts with a glance, and yet, perhaps, melt them in ways no one had dared to imagine. Somewhere in the depths of the storm, the forest whispered, carrying a promise and a warning. Those who survive together change together. And by morning, nothing would remain the same. The storm had not yet passed. Snow swirled in the air like silver mist, and the forest beyond the ruined shrine seemed to pulse with life, mysterious and foreboding. Kalen remained by the doorway, eyes sharp, body tense. Every muscle was coiled as though anticipating an attack. Alara huddled near the fire, shivering not just from the cold but from the strange energy that seemed to vibrate through the shrine. She had never felt the forest so alive, or so aware of them. "You sense it too," Kalen said suddenly, his voice low, more statement than question. He did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the shadows beyond the doorway. I don't know what I sense," Alara admitted. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "But it feels watching us, waiting." Kalen nodded once. "It is. The forest is old, older than kingdoms, older than the stones beneath us. It remembers those who trespass and those it chooses to test." Alara swallowed. "Test?" Kalen finally turned to her, his face a mask of sharp lines softened only by the flickering firelight. "Not everyone survives the forest's trials," he said simply. "Some fall to fear, some to pride, some to themselves." A shiver ran down Alara's spine. She had survived courts, gossip, and Kalen's cutting presence, but this forest was unlike anything she had faced. And now, alone with the Alpha King, she realized how fragile her own courage might be. "You've survived it before," she said cautiously. "Alone." Kalen's eyes darkened. "I have, but it changes you. It reveals truths you cannot ignore. I have faced this forest and lived, but the price was my heart." Alara frowned, confusion mingling with curiosity. His words sounded almost like confession, though she had learned never to take a king's softness at face value. "What do you mean?" she asked, stepping closer despite herself. "Your heart." Kalen's gaze fell distant, as though staring through the walls of the shrine into memories she could not see. "A king cannot show weakness. A ruler cannot love freely, for love makes him vulnerable." And yet, his voice softened almost imperceptibly, "I have longed, I have tried, and I have failed." Alara felt an unfamiliar ache. The man she hated, feared, even was not merely cold, but broken in ways she had never imagined. The fire flickered between them, a small, stubborn light against the storm. For a moment, silence stretched, not empty but charged, heavy with unspoken truths. Then a sudden gust of wind rattled the shrine doors, and the shadows beyond the windows seemed to stir with movement. Kalen's hand went instinctively to his sword. "They are coming," he said, tone low and steady. "The creatures of the storm, they are drawn to life, to fear, and to power." Alara's heart leapt into her throat. "Creatures?" Kalen's gaze met hers, unwavering. "They are not entirely of this world. The forest has guardians, spirits, predators. Call them what you will. They test, they punish, they feed. And now they have found us." Alara's mind raced. She had grown up hearing tales of spirits, of the forest taking lives, of travelers vanishing without trace. She had never believed it. Yet now, trapped in the ruins, with Kalen's presence commanding, steady, and strangely reassuring, fear settled into her bones. "What do we do?" she whispered. Kalen did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. The touch was light, yet carried authority, warmth, and restraint. "We survive," he said simply. "Together." The word sent an unexpected thrill through her chest. Together. She did not know if she wanted it or feared it, but there was no choice. The forest would not wait. Hours passed in tense preparation. Kalen inspected the ruins, checking for weak points for places they might hide. Alara assisted as best she could, her fear sharpening her senses. She felt the forest in ways she could not explain. The subtle vibrations in the snow, the shadows that shifted unnaturally, the air that carried a faint hum of power. She realized then, almost with a start, that she could feel something deep inside herself, a strange resonance with the forest's energy. It was subtle at first, a warmth under her skin, a prickling along her fingers. When she concentrated, the air seemed to respond, moving slightly as if listening. Kalen noticed her hesitation, the flicker in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. Alara bit her lip, unsure if she should reveal her discovery. I think the forest is speaking to me," she admitted cautiously. Kalen's eyes narrowed, studying her with a mixture of surprise and calculation. "It has chosen you," he said finally. "Not all are aware of it, not all can hear it. That is a gift and a burden." "A burden?" she echoed, fear rising alongside curiosity. "Yes, the forest demands understanding, control, and courage. Those who cannot master their gifts are lost to it. And sometimes," His voice darkened, a shadow crossing his sharp features. Sometimes it awakens what you fear most within yourself. Alara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She wanted to flee, to reject this strange connection, but she also felt drawn to it, as if the forest itself had chosen her for a reason beyond her understanding. Night fell, and the storm showed no signs of ceasing. Snow battered the ruined shrine like 1,000 tiny hammers. Kalen positioned himself near the doorway, vigilant. Alara stayed by the fire, but now, instead of fear, a sense of purpose stirred within her. She began to focus, allowing the forest's subtle energy to guide her thoughts, her senses. Hours later, the first threat arrived. A low growl echoed through the snow-laden trees, a sound that vibrated through the shrine walls. Alara stiffened, her pulse racing. Kalen's hand gripped the hilt of his sword, his body coiled like a spring. A shadow passed the broken window, a massive shape shifting unnaturally with glowing eyes that pierced the dim light. Kalen stepped forward, sword raised, voice calm but firm. "Be gone," he commanded. The creature growled, slow and deliberate, its gaze fixed on them. Then it lunged, and Kalen met it, blade striking sparks as steel met unnatural strength. Alara's heart pounded. She wanted to flee, yet something within her called for action. Without thinking, she stretched out her hands, letting the forest's energy flow through her. A subtle wind rose inside the shrine, pushing back against the creature. Kalen noticed instantly. "You can control it?" he asked, astonished. I think so," Alara admitted, fear and determination warring inside her. She focused, and the air thickened, swirling around the creature. It hesitated, growling but unable to approach. Kalen struck with precision, forcing it back further. The creature shrieked, then retreated into the storm. Silence fell once more, broken only by the howling wind. Kalen turned to her, a flicker of admiration crossing his usually stoic features. "You are stronger than you know," he said. His voice was almost soft, almost human. Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of pride, fear, and something she did not yet understand. I only reacted," she whispered. "No," Kalen said, shaking his head slightly. "You are not just reacting, you are surviving, and more than that, you are awakening." The words hung in the air. Alara wanted to question them, to push him away, to deny the strange pull she felt toward him. But the forest outside seemed to hum in approval, its snow-laden branches whispering secrets only she could feel. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken, though the forest remained alive, restless, and unpredictable. Kalen and Alara sat in silence, exhaustion heavy in their bones. Alara glanced at him, noticing for the first time the subtle lines of fatigue around his eyes, the rare tension in his jaw. The man she had hated for so long was not merely cold, but burdened, haunted, and perhaps capable of change. Kalen caught her gaze, and for a fleeting moment the mask of the Alpha King faltered. His eyes softened, just enough to reveal a spark of vulnerability, a trace of longing and perhaps trust. "Tomorrow," he said finally, breaking the silence, "we must leave the shrine. The forest will not allow us to linger, and we are not yet free from its judgment." Alara nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Freedom was never simple in Valdoria, not from kings, not from curses, and certainly not from oneself. The sun rose slowly, casting pale light across the snow and the ancient ruins. The storm had passed, but the forest still held its secrets, its dangers, and its trials. And somewhere in the depths of that cold, endless expanse, Alara felt the pull of something greater, something terrifying, powerful, and yet deeply alive. The forest was no longer silent. Its snow-laden trees creaked, swayed, and whispered secrets that Alara could feel more than hear. Every step they took on the frozen ground was measured, careful, as though the very earth beneath them could decide whether they lived or died. Kalen moved ahead, his figure a shadow against the pale dawn. He was silent, every movement precise, controlled, his sword ready in his hand. Alara followed close behind, her senses sharp, attuned to the subtle energy thrumming through the forest. She could feel it, the life in the trees, the pulse of the snow, the creatures watching, waiting. "I can feel it," she said softly, almost to herself. "The forest, it's alive, watching us." Kalen glanced back, his expression unreadable. "It tests those who enter it," he said. "Not all survive, and some never return the same." Alara shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of his words. She had seen him face danger, command the forest with his presence, and yet there was no arrogance in him now, only focus, only survival. The path grew treacherous. Snow-covered uneven ground and frozen streams had turned to jagged ice. Each misstep could be fatal. Kalen led the way, his gaze sweeping the forest in calculated arcs. Every shadow seemed alive. Every sound, crackling branches, distant howls, felt like a warning. Suddenly, a deep growl echoed through the trees. Alara froze. Kalen's hand went to his sword, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Stay close," he said quietly. His eyes narrowed, scanning the forest. The creature emerged. Its form was massive, taller than a horse, limbs twisted, fur dark and bristling, eyes glowing like molten amber. It moved with unnatural speed, and the snow seemed to swirl around it as if obeying some unseen command. Alara felt fear rise, but beneath it was something else, a strange thrill. The forest's energy responded to her heartbeat, to her rising courage. She reached out instinctively, letting it flow through her, shaping the wind, guiding the snow. The creature faltered, sensing the power she wielded. Kalen did not hesitate. He stepped forward, sword flashing, meeting the creature's charge. Sparks flew as steel met unnatural strength. His movements were fluid, lethal, precise, yet every strike was defensive, not reckless. Alara followed instinct, her hands raised. She felt the forest's pulse through her veins, guiding her. Snow whipped into a whirlwind around the creature, slowing it, disorienting it. It growled, clawed, but could not reach them. Kalen's eyes met hers, a rare flash of approval. "Do not falter," he said. "Trust yourself." Together they pushed the creature back, forcing it to retreat into the shadowed trees. Silence returned, heavy and trembling, the forest seeming to exhale. Alara's chest heaved with exertion and adrenaline. "You controlled it," Kalen said finally, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "You have power more than you realize." Alara shook her head, still catching her breath. "I only tried. I didn't know what I was doing." Kalen's gaze lingered on her, sharp and piercing. "You are awakening," he said simply, "and with awakening comes responsibility." Alara felt a weight settle on her shoulders. Responsibility. She had never considered herself capable of anything beyond survival, yet now she felt the forest's pulse entwined with her own. She was no longer just a frightened noblewoman. She was something more, something connected to the very life of the land. They continued through the forest, each step cautious, each glance alert. The morning light was pale, weak against the lingering storm clouds, but it revealed strange marks in the snow, footprints too large, too heavy, and twisted unnaturally. Kalen followed them, his face set in concentration. "These are not ordinary creatures," he said. "They are drawn to power, to fear, and to weakness. We must remain strong." Alara's thoughts raced. Fear, she realized, could be weaponized, not just against them, but through them. If she let it take hold, she could become prey. But if she embraced her strength, she could survive, and perhaps even protect Kalen. Hours passed. Hunger and fatigue gnawed at them, yet the forest pressed on, relentless. Kalen's stoicism remained unbroken, though Alara noticed the slightest tremor in his hands as he guided her over frozen streams. She had seen kings command armies, forests, and men alike, yet she now understood. Even he could not control the forest entirely. Even he could be tested. As evening approached, they stumbled upon a frozen river wide and treacherous. The ice gleamed like glass, stretching endlessly into shadow. Crossing it was unavoidable. Kalen tested the ice first, sword tapping sharply. It held for now. He gestured for Alara to follow. Her heart raced as her boots slid on the glassy surface. Halfway across, a crack sounded, sharp and terrifying. The ice trembled beneath them. Kalen grabbed her arm instantly, pulling her back to solid ground. "Steady," he commanded, eyes scanning the riverbank for safer passage. "Do not let fear guide your steps." Alara nodded, gripping her cloak tightly, feeling the warmth of his hand as he steadied her. She hated to admit it, but in this moment she depended on him completely. Once across, they settled near the edge of a dense copse of trees. Night was falling, shadows deepening, and the air grew colder. Kalen started a small fire, its light flickering against the snow. Alara helped, though her hands trembled. Not from cold, but from the realization that this forest, with all its mysteries, had forced them to rely on each other. "Tell me," she said finally, sitting close to the fire, "why do you endure so much? The storms, the creatures, the endless vigilance." Kalen's eyes flicked to her, dark and unyielding. "Because a king must endure, because weakness cannot survive, because the curse I carry does not allow me to falter, and because I have no choice." "A curse?" she asked, curiosity and fear mingling. He did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Long ago," he said finally, voice low. I made a choice. A choice to protect my kingdom, to protect those I love, and in doing so, I lost the ability to love freely. The forest, the storms, the creatures, they are part of the punishment, the consequence of my fear and my pride. They remind me of what I cannot have and what I cannot give. Alara felt a pang of sympathy she did not expect. She had always seen him as cold, unyielding, and harsh, yet now she glimpsed the man beneath the legend, the man burdened by past choices, haunted by love he dared not show. She began, unsure what to say. I don't know what to say. Kalen's lips twitched, almost a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. Do not say anything, he said. Actions speak louder than words, and right now, surviving the night is enough. Silence fell between them again, filled not with emptiness, but with understanding. Two souls, scarred in different ways, bound together by circumstance, by survival, and now by something neither could yet name. Hours passed, the night deepening, the forest alive with whispering shadows. Alara felt the power within her grow, subtle but undeniable, responding to the rhythm of the world around her. Kalen noticed, of course, he always noticed, but he said nothing, letting her discovery unfold on its own. Then, just as she began to feel a fragile sense of confidence, the ground trembled. From the shadows emerged a massive figure, taller than any creature they had faced. Its limbs were twisted, its eyes glowing with unnatural light. It moved with deliberate intent, and Alara felt the forest pulse beneath her feet, as if warning her of the danger. Kalen's hand went to his sword, his stance unyielding. This is the final test, he said, his voice steady, and we must face it together. Alara's heart raced, fear and exhilaration intertwining. She had survived the forest's trials before, but this felt different, greater. The creature was not just a predator, it was a guardian, a force of judgment, a mirror of the fears within them both. Together they faced it. Kalen's sword struck with precision, deflecting the creature's attacks. Alara raised her hands, letting the forest's energy flow through her, guiding the snow and wind. The air thickened, swirling around the creature, slowing its movements, disorienting it. For a brief moment their eyes met, hers wide with determination, his dark with focus and something softer beneath it. And in that shared glance, a silent promise was made. They would endure this together. The battle raged, neither yielding. Sparks flew, snow swirled, and the night itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the creature shrieked, finally retreating into the forest, leaving them shaken but alive. Kalen lowered his sword, chest heaving. You have grown stronger, he said, voice low. And so have I. Alara nodded, her own chest tight with emotion. We survived, she whispered, though the weight of what they had faced hung heavily in the air. Yes, Kalen said, his gaze meeting hers. But the forest does not forgive easily. Tomorrow it will test us again. And not only the forest. Others are coming, forces that do not care for life, love, or loyalty. They care only for power. Alara's eyes widened. Others? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver. Prepare yourself, he said finally. You are stronger than you know, but the trials are not over, and I fear what we will face next may demand more than strength. It may demand sacrifice. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening, waiting, its ancient energy thrumming around them. Alara realized, with a mix of fear and resolve, that she had come too far to turn back. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with Kalen, because the bond forged in survival was now unbreakable, fragile though it was. And as the sun rose over the snow-laden forest, casting pale gold across the ruins, Alara understood something she had never allowed herself to feel. Survival was not enough. She wanted more. And perhaps so did Kalen. The forest was alive, but now it felt alive in a way that was dangerous, expectant, and overwhelming. Snow swirled around them, but not randomly. The wind twisted in arcs that seemed deliberate, guiding them deeper into the heart of the ancient woods. Every branch, every shadow, every rustle seemed to carry meaning, a warning, a test. Kalen and Alara moved cautiously, side by side, their steps synchronized. The events of the past nights had drawn them together, forging a bond neither could ignore. He had taught her to trust herself. She had taught him that he could rely on another without losing control. Yet the forest was not finished testing them. Ahead, a clearing opened, glowing with an ethereal light that seemed to rise from the snow itself. At the center stood a towering figure, taller than any creature they had faced, cloaked in shadows, its form shifting, never entirely still. Its eyes glowed like twin suns, and it radiated a presence that pressed against their minds, probing, questioning, judging. "The final trial," Kalen whispered, voice tight with tension. "Whatever this is, it will demand more than strength. It will demand sacrifice." Alara's heart hammered in her chest. She had faced the forest's tests before, she had battled its creatures, and yet the presence before them felt absolute, infinite. A force older than Valdoria itself, older than kings, older than life. "I'm ready," she said softly, though fear curled through her. She did not step forward yet, she waited, feeling the forest's pulse flow through her. Kalen's gaze lingered on her, uncharacteristically soft. "We face this together," he said. "Whatever comes, we do not falter, not now, not ever." The shadow stirred, and the forest seemed to bend toward it, folding the snow and wind into a whirlwind around its form. It spoke, not in words, but in thought, in emotion, in images that pierced the mind like shards of ice. Memories of failure, loss, fear, and regret flashed in their minds, testing their will, questioning their courage. Alara stumbled, vision swimming with flashes of the past, the whispers of court intrigue, her family's warnings, the fear of depending on Kalen. Kalen's hand shot out, steadying her, his grip firm and unwavering. "Do not falter," he said, eyes blazing with determination. "We are stronger together, remember that." She nodded, forcing herself to stand tall, to feel the energy of the forest through her veins. The shadows around the creature swirled, and she sensed the connection. Her powers, her awakening, were part of this trial. She could not run from herself, from the forest, or from the bond forming with Kalen. The figure advanced. Its form solidified into a massive silhouette of frost and shadow, limbs twisting unnaturally, eyes burning into their souls. Kalen stepped forward, sword raised, his stance commanding yet cautious. Alara raised her hands, letting the forest's energy flow through her, weaving snow and wind into protective currents around them. The creature struck first, a massive swipe that could have crushed them both. Kalen blocked with his sword, sparks flying as steel met shadow. Alara called upon the forest, summoning a wall of swirling snow and wind to push it back. The air vibrated with power, charged with tension and energy. They moved as one. Kalen's sword struck with precision, every motion calculated, every strike defensive and purposeful. Alara shaped the forest's power, her control growing with each pulse, each beat of her heart. The creature hesitated, disoriented by their combined strength. "You are stronger than your fear," Kalen shouted, his voice carrying over the storm. "Do not let it control you." Alara felt warmth rise in her chest, not from fire, not from the forest, but from Kalen. His presence, steady, commanding, and unwavering, grounded her. She focused, letting the forest answer to her will, shaping the wind and snow into a vortex around the creature. The shadow shrieked, a sound that rattled the trees and froze the blood, yet it recoiled under the force of their combined power. Kalen's eyes met hers, dark and intense, and for the first time she felt the depth of his vulnerability, his fear of loss, his fear of failing those he cared for. And she understood completely that his coldness had always been armor, not indifference. Together they pressed forward. Each strike from Kalen and each swirl of snow from Alara chipped away at the creature's form. It shrieked again, retreating slightly, but its eyes never left them. This was not just a battle of strength. It was a test of courage, trust, and unity. Suddenly, the creature lashed out with a surge of energy that threw them both backward. Alara landed hard, snow exploding around her. Kalen's sword clashed with the shadow, holding it at bay, but the force was relentless. She felt herself falter, fear clawing at her heart. "Do not give in," Kalen shouted, striding through the storm to reach her. He grabbed her hand, pulling her upright. "We are stronger together, remember that." She met his gaze, the intensity of his eyes grounding her, anchoring her to the present. She drew in a steadying breath, letting her fear transform into determination. The forest's energy flowed through her fully now, responding to her will, her courage, and her bond with Kalen. The shadow faltered. Its strikes became less precise, less confident. It sensed the unity between them, the bond forged in fire and frost, fear and survival. Kalen's sword moved with lethal grace, every strike chipping at its power. Alara shaped the forest's energy into a spiral of wind and snow, encasing the creature in a storm of pure force. For a moment time seemed to pause. The forest held its breath, and then with a final shriek the creature dissipated into the air, vanishing like mist in sunlight. Silence returned, the storm breaking, leaving only the soft whisper of snow falling. Kalen lowered his sword, chest heaving, eyes dark with exertion and relief. Alara's hands trembled, but the warmth in her chest remained, the warmth of triumph, of awakening, of connection. "You survived," Kalen said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. He looked at her, the distance of legend gone, replaced by something personal, intimate, and profoundly human. Alara met his gaze, her own heart pounding. "We survived together," she whispered. Kalen's lips curved, almost a smile, the first she had ever seen. "Yes," he said softly, "together." The forest seemed to exhale, its energy retreating, leaving a calm so deep it felt sacred. Sunlight began to filter through the snow-laden trees, casting pale gold across the frozen landscape. The trials were over, for now. Alara looked at Kalen, seeing him not as the cold, untouchable Alpha King, but as a man, flawed, burdened, and yet capable of change. "Kalen," she began, her voice trembling with emotion she had never allowed herself to feel. He turned to her, eyes intense, unwavering. "Do not speak," he said softly. "Actions are enough, and right now our actions are to survive, to endure, and to live beyond this forest." They moved through the snow, walking together, side by side, their steps steady. No words were needed. The bond forged through trials, fear, and courage was stronger than any vow. It was unspoken, yet undeniable. As the edge of the forest approached, Alara felt the last vestiges of the storm fade. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the frozen land. And for the first time she felt hope, not just for survival, but for the future. Kalen paused at the forest's edge, turning to her. "You have changed," he said quietly. "And so have I. The forest tests those who enter, but it also reveals truth. And the truth is that neither of us can remain the same." Alara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. They had faced death, fear, and power beyond imagining. They had survived together. And in that survival, they had found something far more powerful: trust, respect, and a connection that neither legend nor curse could break. She stepped closer, feeling warmth in his presence that had nothing to do with the sun. "Kalen, her words faltered. For once she could not find the right phrase, but he understood without it. He reached for her hand, his touch firm yet gentle. "I know," he said softly, "and I feel the same. The forest has taught us much. But the greatest lesson is that we are stronger together." The snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked out of the forest, leaving behind the shadows, the trials, and the creatures that had tested them. The world beyond was cold, harsh, and unforgiving, but they would face it side by side, as equals, as survivors, as something more than legend. Human, capable of love, courage, and redemption. The kingdom of Valdoria awaited them, its walls and streets familiar yet forever changed in their eyes. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the trees, Alara knew that the forest's trials had not only tested them, they had transformed them, bound them, and awakened something neither had expected. The possibility of a future together, free from fear, free from regret, free from the cold. Kalen looked at her once more, eyes soft now but still commanding. "We have survived storms, shadows, and ourselves," he said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Alara smiled, a warmth blooming in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "Together," she repeated. And for the first time in her life, she meant it, not as a defiance, not as a duty, but as a truth. The forest behind them was silent, watching, knowing. The trials had ended, but the story of the Alpha King and the woman who had once hated him was only beginning. And though shadows might always linger, though the cold might always return, they had learned the greatest truth. Love, courage, and trust could thaw even the coldest of hearts. And so, walking side by side, Kalen and Alara emerged from the forest, not as a king and a noblewoman bound by fear, but as two souls tempered by trials, ready to face the world and each other with hearts open, brave, and free.